Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The Emperor's new Rite clothes. And we know what the Emperor was wearing when he was all proud of his new clothes, designed by his expert, not the liturgical expert, but in the fairy tale, his tailor, the perfect set of clothes. And he was so proud of his new clothes, which we know what they are. It took children, it took the young, it took um, teenagers, little kids saying, "Hey, hey, hey, what? Why are all the adults clapping there and saying, wow, how wonderful these clothes are, how beautiful these clothes are, how glorious these clothes are, oh Emperor. Your clothes are amazing. Your experts have devised you the most beautiful clothes since the creation of time." When it took a little child to look at all these adults and saying, "Hey, the emperor is naked. The emperor has no clothes." And that is the story of the new Rite clothes of Paul VI, pushed by Francis as the most beautiful clothes that there has ever been. This is an article printed in the Catholic Herald, September 7th, 2022. It doesn't matter when it was printed because what is important is what it says. And the author is Dom Hughes Somerville, and he's a Benedictine monk. And here's the article. So we're going to go through it a bit, and that'll be it, because it is quite telling. The emperor's new Rite clothes, meaning the emperor is naked. All right, or it's actually quite disgusting. So, anyways, all I'm going to read the whole thing and I'm do my little commentary. All the sides in the wearying debates on matters from synodality to liturgy invariably invoke a legitimacy deriving directly or indirectly from Vatican II. They both passed, as Ratzinger himself, when he was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith under Saint Pope John Paul II, told the Chilean bishops in 1988 that Vatican II, and he was an expert at it, he was one of the shakers and movers of the council. He was actually one of the formers of Vatican II. And he said Vatican II restricted itself to being on a modest level as a pastoral council that defined no dogma. That is Cardinal Ratzinger, prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, later Pope Benedict XVI. That's what he said. But anyways, it's the Council of Councils when it defined nothing, excommunicated nobody, and defined no doctrine or dogma. It was a pastoral council trying to reformulate or state the faith supposedly in a more modern way for people to embrace it, not to reject it. All right, let's continue. So they all go back to Vatican II. Of course, the modernists will say, well, the Vatican II told us to reform the liturgy, simplify the rites. The traditionalists will say, well, look, it told us to maintain Gregorian chant, and keep Latin and the Latin rites, and to for the Orientals, actually, in the decree for the Orientals, it tells them to restore their ancient customs and rites and traditions and maintain them. So which Vatican II are we looking at here? That's the problem with Vatican II. You know what? Anyways, so this fact alone signals that reception of Vatican II is neither settled or even clear cut. He asks, this monk says, which version of Vatican II does one accept? The competing versions focus either on the council's decrees or its spirit. So Cardinal Ratzinger, John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, always went to the letter. You cannot have a spirit that contradicts the letter. So they said that's where the hermeneutics of continuity came, because Benedict XVI, I believe himself, said, like, if we cannot show that Vatican II is in continuation with the previous councils and the previous teachings of the church, he said, this was the only way to make Vatican II legitimate. Otherwise, basically, it's an illegitimate council. He said the only way to make Vatican II legitimate is to show that it is a continuation of the tradition of the church, not an end of tradition, which is a word he said at 1988 to the Chilean bishops, as a start from zero, as a super council. That's what he told the Chilean bishops in 1988, which is the hermeneutics of rupture, of ignoring the decrees, ignoring the letters, refusing to interpret them in line with tradition, or clarifying them, or adjusting them to mean what it should mean, and following the spirit of rupture of my own interpretation in contradiction of the very letter of Vatican II. I have several videos on Vatican II and posts. Even Cardinal Ottaviani, after Vatican II, condemns the modernists who use the council in the name of the spirit of the council to contradict this council. And I have a couple of videos. Maybe I'll put them at the end as the links so you guys can watch them. I don't know, a couple of years ago. But anyways, so which Vatican II do you accept? Francis Jorge Bergoglio and his junta and the Sankt Gallen Mafia, they reject the letter and adhere to the so-called spirit of the council. When somebody points to the letter, it's like, well, yeah. That was just the beginning. That was, it's a starting point. That was the starting point. Now the synodality, the synodal synodality is a continuation of Vatican II. That's what they're saying. All right. In all this, Vatican II risks becoming an ideological totem. It is already empty of any objective meaning. That was kind of a problem. I read the whole text of Vatican II a couple of times. You can reconcile a lot of what even traditionalists say, oh, that's contradiction. Then you can find other decrees which modify the terms of another decree. So there is, again, you can just say, well, I'm not going to take that modification of this. I'm going to adhere to that or adhere to this. That is the problem with a lot of Vatican II documents. But if you want to do a hermeneutics of continuity, very difficult, but possible, I would say. But so this becomes a total empty of any objective meaning and employed primarily for polemical purposes. The Vatican is adept at this as anyone, but in the current liturgical fracas, has it, meaning the Vatican, overplayed an already weak hand. You have nothing there. Look at the roots of I'm using the words of Pope Paul VI, the liturgical innovation of the new Rite. That's what Paul VI called his creation. Empty, weak hand, and underestimated the laity. Yeah, the laity aren't like the laity of the 50s and 60s. Oh, the priest said, okay. The Pope said, okay. So God walking on earth, the Pope said, I should throw away all the liturgical heritage of the church of 2,000 years. Okay. The Pope said, eat and drink and be merry during Lent. All right. The Pope said, so I guess it's fine. It doesn't matter what scripture and tradition and Jesus Christ himself said. Now, this mentality is slavish mentality. It's a caricature of the Christian Catholic faith. So Pope Francis, using the term loosely, his two apostolic letters on the liturgy in 2021 and 2022 restricting the use of the preconciliar missal while calling for an enhanced liturgical formation of the laity. What a joke. What the Vatican seems to miss is that, so this is what they miss, because they have eyes but they do not see. They have ears and they do not hear. Adherents of the older missal are generally younger, largely better informed than their elders, and thoroughly imbued with the democratic forthrightness of expression that the Holy Father, meaning Jorge, not Benedict, has strongly advocated under the banner of, however you say that, parousia, meaning frankness, speak openly. Of course, he wants to hear what he wants to hear. If you speak openly of things he doesn't want to hear, no, you shut up. You shut up. Many of them have read the decrees of Vatican II. Many of them have read the decrees of Vatican II themselves, probably more than most priests who have talked about Vatican II without actually even reading a sentence from it, and discovered a marked difference from what has subsequently been done in its name. And I have to say as well, many traditionalists who condemn Vatican II on a lot of things erroneously have never read Vatican II. So I'm not going to waste time reading it. Well, read it so you know what you're criticizing at least. Like Vatican II, for example, condemns, believe it or not, what goes by the term of ecumenism these days. Yeah, it does. Because in Vatican II, it condemns false Irenicism, which is what goes by the name of modern ecumenism. Irenicism was basically peace at all costs. Let's tone down our dogmas. Let's not talk about our differences. Let's just get along. Let's water down the faith. That's Irenicism. And that is modern ecumenism. And Vatican II actually condemned that. Believe it or not. Perhaps the intention was only that only certain subsets within the church should employ parousia, meaning frankness. Oh yeah, you guys don't talk. You, my buddies, talk, but these people don't talk. One assumes in the context of other strands to Pope Francis's teaching that this frankness was encouraged for those on the peripheries. Now, Francis Jorge talks a lot. He talks, humility and humbleness, and he's proud. He talks mercy, and he's, vengeful. He talks democracy, and he's dictatorial. Kind of like a lot of the Democratic Party in the U.S. They accuse others of what they themselves are and what they themselves do. Let's see here. So it seems that the Pope Francis teaching that this frankness was encouraged for those on the peripheries. However, the recent swinging restrictions on the older liturgy, meaning the real Roman Rite, the real heritage of the Latin West, not the fake fabrication of the 1960s of Paul VI, so generously lifted under Benedict XVI, and there was nothing generous about it. It was a matter of justice. There's no generosity in justice, in truth. In the name of ecclesiastical communion, has forced a significant proportion of practicing Catholics, proportionally far younger than in most parishes. You watch some Novus Ordo parishes, especially like in France or in Quebec, in Canada. It's like they're all like, 80-year-olds. Where is like the 50-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 30-year-olds? They don't exist. Pretty sad. onto a very real periphery. So these restrictions have actually pushed the young, which Francis talks about so much, who into the real peripheries of the church. Oh no, you can't have the mass in the parish churches. So don't you want to have communion among people? You aren't talking about like division. You're actually forcing these people into separate, out of town barns to have the mass. Oh, how merciful of Francis the Humble. Perhaps this is not what the Holy Father intended when he encouraged people to make a mess in July 2015. Having restricted the older liturgy, which he has no power of doing, no pope or council or bishop's conference or bishop has the power to forbid or to dramatically alter the received and approved rites of the Catholic Church used in the administration of the sacraments, as the profession of faith of the Council of Trent and the profession of faith of Vatican I explicitly state. And even the Council of Trent says that nobody, whosoever he may be, can alter the liturgical rites of the Church at his will. That includes the Pope. And we're talking not like, let's, one little prayer can be. No. We're talking about here, a completely fabricated liturgy. Where are we here? Having restricted the old liturgy, null and void, ignore it completely and utterly. For the sake of the concord and unity of the Church, the result has been the opposite. Well, obviously. Like, why don't you just restrict all the other rites of the Church? The Malchites, the Malankara, the Byzantine, the Ethiopic, the Coptic, the Armenian. Well, for the unity of the Church, they must all celebrate the one form of the rite of Mass for the unity. Otherwise, if they celebrate Mass differently and they have their various liturgical customs, this is division in the Church. You see what I mean? Have been the exact opposite of his so-called unity, with many Catholics now experiencing new divisions and hurts. Wounds that had been healing have been reopened. Thank you, Jorge, O merciful one. Ostensibly, the new restrictions were occasioned by those traditionalists who were apparently too outspoken and doctrinaire in their advocacy of the preconciliar missal, meaning the real Roman Rite. Because Paul VI himself, I have a video on it, called his new creation, the liturgical innovation of the new Rite in his speeches. And another one in the same speech, he calls it a novelty, an annoyance, something which will cause great disturbance to the most faithful. And he actually, while he's allowing his new rite to be used, he talks about the Roman Rite and the new Rite. Meaning, it's not the Roman Rite, it is the Rite of Paul VI. When Jorge attacked the Knights of Malta and got rid of Cardinal Burke and the head of the Knights of Malta, because they were adhering more to the ancient liturgy again, the new usurpers at the Knights of Malta, in their groveling to Francis, said that they are now fully returning completely and only to the Rite of Paul VI. Very accurate, because it's not the Roman Rite. It's the Rite of Paul VI. It's the fabrication of Paul VI. It's not the Rite of Catholic West. Ostensibly, these new restrictions were occasioned by those traditionalists who were apparently too outspoken and doctrinaire in their advocacy of the preconciliar missal. No doubt some were guilty of this, yet to punish the many for the misdeeds, is it really misdeeds to point out the truth, of a few seems remarkably intolerant, if not totalitarian. Well, obviously you have a dictator pope, assuming he's pope here. This is especially so given that so many of the committed young with whom the church desperately seeks to engage seem to prefer the traditional liturgy. Yes, they do, because it's not boring. It's not banal. Like Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI said, a banal, on-the-spot product that gave us, he said, the new liturgical forms and rites gave us stones instead of bread. That's what Cardinal Ratzinger said. And I've pointed it out on many videos with links to it, so I'm not going to run trying to find you links for it. You search for it and you'll find it. I think it's all in his introduction to the French edition, original edition of Klaus Gamber's The Reform of the Roman Missal. Monsignor Klaus Gamber, find it. Look for it. I put links to it before. Moreover, the media-savvy young so see online or experience firsthand grievous liturgical abuses of the new liturgy and ask why there are no restrictions focused on these. Because for them, these are not abuses. These are expressions of the living faith of the community. They're not abuses. You could put any form of paganization into the liturgy. It's not an abuse. It's the expression of the community. Yeah, okay. But adhering to the rites of the apostles is an abuse. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because it expresses the unchanged faith. And that's actually in my critique of the so-called decrees, the defenders of them, Jorge's Junta online and so-called journalists, specifically say that the preconciliar rite, the real Roman rite, and the fake Roman rite express different ecclesiologies and express a different faith, a preconciliar faith and a postconciliar faith. No wonder they attack the preconciliar liturgy, because it expresses the Christian faith unadulterated. Oh yeah, why are there no restrictions on these abuses? Well, because they want the abuses. That's not abuses for them. Abuses to have the real liturgy. The young have an especially special sensitivity to inconsistency and injustice. And this is definitely an injustice. That the restrictions are explicitly aimed at addressing non-acceptance of the liturgical reform. Well, yeah, because it is a liturgical deform. Seems only to highlight the issue, whether the reform as enacted correspond to the decrees of Vatican II. Highlights the issue of whether the reform as enacted, meaning the fake Roman Rite, correspond to the decrees of Vatican II. In a recent interview with the tablet, Cardinal Arthur the Cockroach said the new restrictions derive their liturgical from the liturgical dicastery's mission to promote the renewal undertaken by the Second Vatican Council. The renewal. Oh wow, we see the renewal. Do you see the explosion of faith? Look at Brazil, where vast majority of Catholics have become Pentecostal, evangelicals. Wow, the fruits of the council are unbelievable. Look at Latin America, which used to be 95% Catholic, have become vastly Protestant. Evangelical, Pentecostal, and every sect and sectarian is running rampant over there. Or atheistic and communist and socialist. Wow. Wow, it's amazing. The fruits of the council. Look at Europe, where cathedrals and churches have become museums and bars and restaurants. Wow, the fruits of the council. Wow. Look at all the monasteries and nunneries being shut down and sold because nobody's entering. Wow, the fruits of the liturgical reforms and the doctrinal, reforms are so visible for all to see. Don't you see the fruits? This is basically like the devil seeing destruction and loving it. Where is he here? Okay. Renewal. Oh yeah. Okay. It is not mere is it not mere pedantry to point out that no liturgical reform was undertaken by the council? There is no liturgical reform undertaken by the council. The reforms were undertaken. Here it is. The reforms were undertaken by a body called the Concilium, headed by, like really run and controlled by Annibale Bonini. Erected, I have a review of a book called Annibale Bonini, The Destroyer of the Roman Rite. Erected on papal, not conciliar authority to implement the reforms decreed by the council. Again, the reforms were very vague, so interpret them as you wish. But if they held on to tradition, if they held on to the consistent teaching of the church, none of what has happened would have happened. The reformed liturgy, devised by the Concilium, often departs markedly from and exceeds the decrees of the council. The new order of Mass, the Novus Ordo Missae, which is what Paul VI called his creation, was indeed radically new, therefore not Catholic, therefore not apostolic, and distinctly post-conciliar rather than conciliar. Being enacted in the name of the council does not itself guarantee that the Reformed liturgy conforms to its will, and that's exactly what Pope Benedict XVI himself has said. The tepid, even negative reception given to at the Synod of Bishops in 1967 to an experimental celebration of what substantially is the Novus Ordo exposes this fallacy. So the bishops who participated in the council in 1967, they came and did a performance, basically, a performance, an act of the Reformed liturgy. We're doing our own new creation. Like it's insanity. It's like you read the papal teachings and all the teachings of the church. Nobody dared touch the liturgy. It was so sacred. So sacred. It grew organically in different chapters, different cathedrals, different dioceses, gradually over the centuries. Nobody said, okay, let's take it and chop it up and make our own. So even the bishops who participated in Vatican II were horrified in 1967. An experimental celebration. Many of the bishops did not recognize the experiment, which has proven to be an utter failure, as embodying their decrees just 3 years earlier. So it's not the Vatican II rite of Mass, it's the rite of Bonini, the rite of Paul VI. Cardinal Heenan observed that if the experimental rites were adopted, then he would be left, that's from England, he would be left with congregations of mostly women and children. From today's perspective, Cardinal Heenan appears remarkably optimistic because you don't have men and you don't even have women or children, well, especially children. As soon as they're old enough to, that's boring. I don't want to go there anymore. Yeah, well, yeah. Thank you, Paul VI. Thank you, Vatican II, the spirit of Vatican II. I mean, that was the whole point, is destroy the Catholic faith. That's the whole point of the deforms. Furthermore, Cardinal Cockroach asserted in his interview that those who disregard the council and the matter of liturgical reform are putting themselves sideways to the edges of the church. You are becoming more Protestant than you are Catholic, when the actual liturgy, the fake Roman Rite of Paul VI, was designed with the assistance of Protestant ministers and Bonini to specifically water down the Catholic faith and make the Catholic liturgy less or not offensive to our separated brethren. Not the Eastern Orthodox, not the Oriental Orthodox, no, to the heretical Protestant sects. who reject the sacraments, the priesthood, the apostolic succession, the Eucharistic sacrifice. So the fake Roman Rite was fabricated with the assistance of Protestants and designed, even according to Annibale Bonini, so everything was removed from the Catholic liturgy, which might be a stumbling block for our separated brethren, meaning we deformed our own Catholic rites. We watered them down as much as possible so they will not offend those who do not believe the Catholic and Christian faith. So who's the Protestant here? Cockroach. Which liturgy is Protestant? Cockroach. Okay. Let's continue here. We're almost done. It is a remarkable claim it's a remarkable claim and only conceivable if one accepts the enacted liturgical reform as enacted as faithfully implementing the decrees of the council, which Cardinal Roche calls the highest legislation that exists in the church, and the council that legislated nothing, pretty much, decreed nothing. And in that case, even if it did command the formation of a brand new rite, less offensive to Protestant brethren, it would have been null and void. It would have been schismatic and heretical. The church has always taught anybody who attempts to suppress the ancient rites, even a pope who himself does not want to celebrate the rites of the church or invents new ones, he falls into schism. A pope falls into schism. All right? So even if a council perchance ever did that, it would be every single priest and bishop should just ignore it. Just do what must be done, which is maintain the faith once for all delivered to the saints, as expressed in the divine liturgy passed on through the centuries, which embodies the faith. That's why people lose the faith, because the fake Roman Rite has watered down Catholic faith, watered down Catholic practice, leading people to watered down faith, prey to heresy, prey to schism, prey to atheism, prey to agnosticism. Anyways, not very fun thing, huh? Unless that was your purpose, unless it was your purpose to destroy. Where are we here? This is precisely the contested issue, and here a real problem emerges. Cardinal Roche seems to require that the church, not just him, see, he's pointing to Cardinal Roche, when in fact it is Jorge Bergoglio, Francis, and his junta, and a big majority of bishops and even priests who hate the ancient faith. It's not just Cardinal Roche, it's primarily Jorge and his junta and the St. Gallen Mafia. Seem to require that the church deny herself and to employ her authority today to negate her authority in former days. Many will echo Benedict XVI in asking how what was holy yesterday, and indeed for preceding centuries, can suddenly be a danger to faith and the church today. That is what they have been saying. The ancient liturgy is a danger. It's dangerous for the faith. It's dangerous for the church. How can that be? Let's ban the ancient rite and keep the new, because the ancient one is dangerous. And that is basically what they did a video on the old believers and traditional Catholics, old believers, Russian, Eastern Orthodox. That's what the Patriarch Nikon did, was that, well, what we've been celebrating for 1,000 years is wrong. We're going to reform it, go follow the Greek customs. And what we've been doing for 1,000 years is banned. It's illegal. It's schismatical. What? How could that be? And of course, they resisted justly and truly and rightly. But we got to do the same. But I mean, their reforms were like a drop in the ocean compared to the ocean of deforms of the Roman Rite. It's nothing by comparison. Rome is making a serious mistake in its program to shore up the practical reception of the deformed liturgy. He says reformed, but it's truly the deformed liturgy. And in so doing, backing itself into a corner, because you're saying what was celebrated for 1,000 years. Don't tell me it was done in the Council of Trent. No, it wasn't done in the Council of Trent, okay? It's much, much more ancient than that. It's ancient. It was not altered. No committee sat there. No pope in history until Pius V issued any liturgical legislation, like meaning reforming even a missal, a single missal. Right? But he was compelled because of the heresy which was creeping into the church in the 16th century. So he had to said, okay, well, we have to. And he banned the novelties. He banned any liturgical rite newer, less than 200 years old. If your rite was 200 years old or more, keep it. If it was a novelty, well, okay, you either go back to your previous version of it or you adopt the Roman liturgy, which is to maintain tradition. So obviously he did not invent a new rite because he was banning anything younger than 200 years old. So obviously the Roman rite of Pius V was not younger than 200 years old. It's much more ancient. Okay, the liturgical reforms were expressly pastoral, indeed intended to increase congregational participation, active participation of the faithful. The severe decline in the number of congregations since the promulgation of the Reformed liturgy over 50 years ago doesn't suggest, it actually proves, that the reforms have not achieved their purpose. That's saying it nicely. Equating the Reformed liturgy, which I celebrate, but which for all its virtues, what virtues? I mean, in a vacuum, one can say, yeah, it's beautiful, it's nice. But compared to the real Roman rite, or even compared to the ancient rites of the church, East and West, it is a deform. It is poor. There is no virtue in it. For all its virtues. Well, he's being very polite here, very diplomatic, He doesn't want to be called a schismatic traditionalist, a radical traditionalist, opposing the Pope. Because you can see him talking about Cardinal Roach, not talking about the man who put Cardinal Roach in charge to do his will. Equating the Reformed liturgy, which I celebrate, but which, for all its virtues, has failed in its purpose, which is to bring people in, which is not failed, but actually done the exact opposite of the stated purpose, but I think it is the real purpose. With the will of Vatican II leads logically to the conclusion that the failure is the councils, when in fact it is the concilium. So he says, look, if you're talking about this is the council's liturgy, this is the Vatican II's liturgy, well, obviously the Vatican II's liturgy has failed, obviously, for its purpose, which is to bring people in. In fact, it actually drove people out. Therefore, if you keep on insisting it's the Vatican II's liturgy, then you are condemning Vatican II instead of condemning the concilium under Bonini, which formed the liturgy, the Reformed liturgy. That's his point, anyways. The current policy of suppressing, even Bonini actually said that there were certain things they put specifically in the decree on the liturgy very vaguely, so they can interpret them so they can pass the bishop's signatures and approval. But after the council, they can interpret, those in control of the reform, can interpret them as they really wanted. He said that. The current policy of suppressing dissatisfaction by the restriction and marginalization of anyone who points out imperial nakedness, hey, the emperor has no clothes here, aligns disturbingly with that of a totalitarian regime desperate to shore up its legitimacy in the face of dissent and dissatisfaction at the failure the failure of its policies. It shocks those who try to hold the middle ground of fidelity to the church and to reason, but it need not be so. The Vatican could simply continue to allow the old and the new liturgical forms to coexist, as the Russian Orthodox Church finally woke up and said, well, why are we condemning the old believers? They are simply celebrating the liturgy like we all did before the reforms of Patriarch Nikon. They didn't do anything wrong. They're just maintaining the same liturgy, the same ritual that we all did, all Russian Orthodox did. So now there is open intercommunion among groups of old believers and the Russian Orthodox Church. Very good. And allow people to choose. See, he says, well, allow both rites, both forms, and allow people to choose which nourishes their faith and Christian living. Allow them to choose. What's so, like, aren't you so proud of your Reformed liturgy? Isn't the Reformed liturgy designed to bring people in and make them participate and attract them? So why are you afraid? Why are you afraid of the ancient liturgy? Well, Jorge and his junta acted because they saw that the massive increase in people participating in the ancient rite, especially after the so-called global theatrical production of the last 3 years, and people sitting there watching masses on TV, on YouTube. So after people went through the theatrical production, they said, well, hey, what is this liturgy thing? Oh, look at these traditional, is that Catholic? Wow, where can I find one? And traditional parishes exploded. Exploded meaning they doubled, tripled, quadrupled in size. So, okay, now that's dangerous. We got to shut them down. That's too much success here. They got to come back to the liturgy, which is, meant to nourish them, which we invented out of thin air in the 1960s. That would treat lay Catholics as adults, meaning allowing them to choose. Hey, you're adults, so you can pick. I'm not forced to, as a Catholic, to even go to a Roman rite. I can go to a Byzantine rite. I can go to a Carmelite rite. I can go to a Dominican rite. I can go to a Coptic rite. I can go to an Armenian rite. I can go to a Chaldean rite, as long as it's in the communion with Rome. Still Catholic, so why are you... I still have that option, so why are you restricting the ancient Roman rite when I can go to other ancient rites too? But it is precisely this that Rome seems anxious to avoid. Rome is anxious to avoid allowing Catholics to have an option between the real Roman rite and the fake fabrication of Paul VI. Because it's proven a failure. And it's the ancient rite is generating faithful priests, faithful Catholics who are going to the older catechisms and older teachings and saying, wow, that's solid. Here's clear. The faith is clear. Yes, no, this is defined. This is the truth. That's what's allowed. Like Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything else is from the devil. Not this wishy-washy, watery, anything goes Christianity. On the other hand, in restricting the legitimate expression of the Roman rite, the real Roman rite, to the liturgical books promulgated by Paul VI and John Paul II, Rome has allowed some room for maneuver and for saving face. The Ordo Missae of 1965, a post-conciliar reform promulgated by Paul VI, which corresponds very closely to the conciliar decree in adapting the old rite. Again, adapting the old rite, altering it. It must be rejected. Even the reforms of 1955, Pius V, need to be rejected, and the full integral Roman rite must be restored. In adapting the old rite more organically to their expanded liturgical vision. Expanded liturgy. What expanded? By removing prayers, you're removing symbols, cutting down on crosses, reducing all the the vigils and the octaves and removing all that, is that an expanded liturgical vision? What expanded? Where's the expansion? It is the exact opposite of an expansion. It offers the basis for revisiting the reforms that have so patently failed in their purpose, a failure that restrictive legislation will not hide, but only further expose. All right, we're almost done here. Whatever one's approach to the current crisis, the solution must lie in an approach that entices rather than repels, that includes rather than marginalizes. All right, let's see here. All right, so and if Vatican II must remain the gold standard of Catholic identity, that it manifestly and unambiguously faithful to the decrees of the Council, the actual decrees, and then any ideological appropriation of it, rather than any ideological appropriation of it. This is, in fact, expressly what Pope Francis has urged with Desiderio Desideravi. May Rome practice what the Pope preaches. What a joke. The Pope preaches exactly what is being done. The Pope is preaching exactly what has been done. No, Rome is doing exactly, but the men Jorge appointed are the ones doing exactly what he has commanded. Anyways, that's it. That's all. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you next time.